everyone. Welcome back to I See What You're Saying, the Disciplined Listening Podcast. I'm Michael Reddington, and today it is my pleasure to welcome our next guest, Chris Haueter. Chris can easily and accurately be described as a Brazilian Jiu Jitsu legend. He is a 6th-degree black belt, one of the first 12 Americans to ever receive a black belt in Brazilian Jiu Jitsu. He was the first American to submit a Brazilian in competition. He's also the first American black belt to ever compete in the Mundials in Brazil. He's the founder of Combat Base. He is a highly sought after coach and strategist. And perhaps above all else, he is the model of leader as student, which is something we can all learn from, regardless of our hobbies, pursuits, or careers. And I'm very excited to share his perspective with all of you today. Thank you for being here for another wonderful conversation. This conversation is going to take many different twists and turns. We're going to start by talking about the impact that stuttering had on his life, how he feels when he encounters other people who also stutter, and lessons for us in that scenario as well. He's going to talk about the power of words and really illustrate how often words hold different symbols, different meanings in all of our heads, and the power of the words that we choose can significantly impact or alter conversations, communications, relationships. He's going to talk about the idea of how important it is to recognize patterns, but not get trapped by them. He's also going to talk about his philosophy of exploring the ends to find the middle and so much more. I'm really excited to share this conversation with all of you today. Again, thank you for being here. Before we dive in, real quick, let's thank our sponsors. While you're online today, please head over to humantel.com. That's where you can learn all you need to know about how to recognize when people's emotions are likely changing by recognizing shifts in their facial expressions and nonverbal communication. Enter the code INCLUSIVE25 for 25% off the training of your choice while you're on their website. For the professional interviewers, please head over to certifiedinterviewer.com. That's where you can get all your questions answered about the International Association of Interviewers and the Certified Forensic Interviewer designation. That's all over at certifiedinterviewer.com. And finally, while you're online, please check out inclusive.com. That's where you can learn more about the programs our clients ask us to custom facilitate for their leaders, HR managers, sales teams, and beyond, to teach them how to encourage people to share sensitive information under vulnerable circumstances in the face of consequences in all of their high impact conversations. We really appreciate you being here for another week. Thank you so much. So now, without further ado, I introduce to you, Chris Haueter. Hello, Chris. It is a pleasure to meet you. How are you today?
I'm good. How are you, sir?
I'm doing very well. I really appreciate you sharing your time. I know it's the morning out there in California. So much I wish we had time to get into today. I'll keep us focused, I promise. But one of the things that I would love to start the conversation with, I'm going to resist the temptation to bore everybody with detailed jiu-jitsu talk.
Yeah.
But you have a super interesting story from many different perspectives. One of the things is you have dealt with stuttering your whole life.
Yes, I unfortunately have, right?
And now here you are, one of the most recognized jiu-jitsu instructors with a very public personality. You have your own podcast. You're very frequently speaking in front of people. So I appreciate you allowing this. And I would love to start the conversation by asking you, how has overcoming stuttering impacted your life?
God, that's like something, of course, I could give a really huge answer to. I often say, like every story, there's the 1-paragraph version, then there's the 3-paragraph essay version, and then there's the novel version. And sometimes people don't want the 500-page novel version, right? But, it's kind of one of those things. Well, I'll just say by still, and it's very common that, like, I'll go teach a seminar someplace and somebody will come up after to speak with me, who I instantly can spot they're a stutterer. And my first reaction is that typical self-mirror psychological thing. I'll feel embarrassment, guilt, and shame, because I know they've recognized me as a stutterer. And there's a huge part of everybody who has any impediment, speech impediment, physical impediment, whatever it is, that they wished wasn't there, right? And I do know that through various journeys and learning things mostly the hard way in life, that you kind of got to feel those feelings and acknowledge that they're there and get through them. Otherwise, you're only going to make it worse. There's like a lot of theories on stuttering, where it comes from, how it comes. It's kind of like the nature versus nurture argument, right? Some people think it's all genetics, all predetermined. There's studies of twins and, with the same genetics, and they were adopted at birth and they somehow have the same favorite color and the same, like, there's that, which are valid arguments. And then there's the nurture argument, things that happened in your life, how you were raised, your impacts, the parenting style, your siblings, your friends. Like, I'm one of those people that really truly believes it's both. And I think when we try to go down one path, that's when we get ourselves in trouble. Like, I often say that I'm an amateur philosopher, historian, and science enthusiast who tries to incorporate the scientific method to things. And I say try because that is so counterintuitive and instinctive for humans to do. And I truly believe that the scientific method, as devised by, Karl Popper, and I can't think of the Russell, the guys that like realize that there is pseudoscience, which sometimes has the truth or seemingly does, and then there's science. And I recently have just completed season 1 of Einstein's biography on Amazon Prime, which I highly recommend because it's absolutely excellent. Because that period, and interrupt me at any time and draw me back to stuttering, but during that period of time, 1905, when Einstein came up with special relativity or general relativity first. That's why I say I'm not a scientist. I'm a science enthusiast and a history buff, and I love the history of science. How much that revolutionized the world. And it was that period of time, the interwar years between World War I and II, which are fascinating historical period, which is kind of, one could say, the rise of postmodernism. And in essence, relativity is postmodernism. Not in the wooey, gooey, nothing's true sense, whatever, but that things are relative. And the philosopher Hegel, Hegelianism, like a lot of people hate Hegel because they say Hegel's the one who inspired Marx and ushered in communism, which he did. But I also love Schopenhauer, which is like the counter to Hegel. And basically, Hegelianism is, from my perspective and the way it's kind of like the Taoism, the world of opposites that need each other to find truth. You need, coupled with relativity, right? And when you think about like the time and space, and you realize that time is absolutely subjective and the speed of light is constant, and you trip out on that, it really does like transform how one thinks. Now, going back to the stuttering, here I go, right? So I don't know what caused it. And, I'm not going to get into childhood traumas or anything, but there was a distinct period of time in my life, probably from around 4 on and off all through into high school, where there would be period of times where I was almost mute because it would be so bad. And I remember coming home one day from school, elementary school. I was probably in 4th or 5th grade, and I'd been teased. And my mother was an English a teacher and an editor and an avid reader. And when I was being teased, I got teased at school. One of my friends walking home was like, sticks and stones won't break your bones, words can't hurt you, and all that. And I'm trying to convince myself of that, but I feel like, mortally, egally wounded, whatever it is. And, my mom asked me what's wrong. And I said, I get teeth for stuttering, but sticks and stones won't break my bones. Words will never hurt me. And my mom said something, and I don't remember her exact words, but that's absolutely not true at all. Words are more powerful than stones or sticks, even guns. Words can start wars and end wars. They can kill relationships. They could start relationships. Words are what separate humans from the other animals. And that was both relieving and a letdown, because when you're a stutterer, you don't have words. And that was why I fought a lot, because I realized pretty early on, based on things in my external life, observing adults, going to inner city summer camps, that most kids, and this sounds like violent and bad, if you punch them in the face, they fold instantly. And when I can't use words, I'm going to use my body. And that, of course, means I have definitely explored the wrong way that humans should conduct themselves in civilization, right? So I'm truly a Hegelian Taoist in the sense that I explore the extremes to find the middle.
Speaking of finding the middle, and I do really appreciate you sharing the stuttering story. Thank you, because I know that's a personal question to open up a conversation. So thank you for that. Actually, I was going to ask a question, but I'd like to circle back for that 1 second. Reflecting back on your experiences.
Yeah.
And now I'm going to do the aside, talking about choosing to use your body instead of your words, especially as a boy. To people who are listening and haven't heard me recommend it before, I highly recommend Matt Thornton's book, The Gift of Violence, to really understand the psychology of why it's important, especially for young boys, to be able to understand how to defend themselves and stand their ground and manage scenarios like that. And I know Matt was a student of yours. I believe your first black belt or one of your first black belts. So I highly, highly recommend that book. But for those of us that encounter people who stutter, or for people with other communication, I don't want to use the word disabilities, but setbacks, people who struggle in communication, based on your experience, how would you recommend that we interact with them, especially reflecting on the mirror emotions that you say you still feel today of the guilt and the shame? How can we best interact in order to make them either comfortable or get the best of their words from them?
Well, as a, like there's, gosh, how do I put this and not sound like an egomaniac pushing alpha male shit? Basically, anytime you deal with a person, let's just call it a handicap, as if they have a handicap, it's a patronizing.
Sure.
Right? But is it really? I mean, that's up to like my ego. If I'm going to feel like, oh, this person's like talking slower because I stutter, like that's up to me to feel insult or not. Like a lot of people now, and it's obviously in the last 10 years, it's blown up. I'm a fan of the Stoics, but I think people take them the wrong way a lot of times. I think people think Stoicism is a self-help thing, like that's all over the internet. Self-help sells, when really Stoicism is get out of self and help others. And there's another trend out there that kind of is 2 or 3 internet clicks away, which is that empathy is bad. Like somehow empathy is bad. Like that's insane. And I'll say this, we are in weird postmodern, post-truth times where Christians get offended when you quote a Jesus, Republicans get offended when you quote Reagan, and we're relying on the left to protect institution. That is a strange period of time. And the last time we were here was in the late 20s and early 1930s. And that is as an avid history buff who tries to not impose my political ideological opinions on things, there are some things that just stare you in the face. And yeah. And when you think of Berlin in the 20s, which was this bastion of postmodern thinking, liberalism, interracial relations were okay. The 20s flapper girl scenes, American women had just gained the right to vote in the 20s. There's the post-World War I bitterness, especially amongst German troops, but amongst American troops, British troops, French, because it was a bullshit war for the aristocracy. So there was a huge anti-establishment, anti-aristocracy, a populism growing all over the world. But technologically, things were rapidly changing. Your grandpa's grandpa and your grandpa shoed horses their whole life. Now the car is replacing the horse. They're out of a job. The radio, mass communication. There are so many parallels, and there are things that are totally different, right? And that's the Hegelian approach, is to be able to pattern recognize, but not get trapped in a pattern. And the key to get out of a lot of things that I have found, like including stuttering, is to recognize the patterns, but don't think patterns are fixed. That there is both cycles and there is both aberrations. And there are alterations and things like anybody who's a good sci-fi fan, there's nothing as cool as alternate history, alternate universe things, like the classic Star Trek transporter malfunction where they end up in the evil opposite the Trek world where the Federation is fascist, and like that's a great episode, right? And so who knows?
Your point about so many points there, but your point about avoiding patronizing, very important.
Yeah.
But also your point about we decide if we're insulted or not. And as your point, today's day and age is also very important. We consider the context of a conversation.
Yep.
I have a young son and I really try to work with him. It's not so much the words, it's the intentions.
Yes.
There's words you probably shouldn't say in class. Probably get away with it with me, but not in class. But it's the intentions that really matter. But I also love what you said, especially coming from an investigations background. It's important to recognize patterns, but not get stuck in them, because the patterns might change, or there might be a sub pattern, something going on that's very important to recognize. And one of the things I love about listening to you, and there are a lot of different facets that you speak on, is you're constantly open to new ideas, whether you're reading or whether you're studying. And a lot of the work that we do with leaders and different people in different organizations, it's not uncommon. I'm not going to accuse people. It's not uncommon to run into people who got to the top and forgot what it was like on the way up.
Very much.
And just for a little bit of context, and people don't have to be into jiu-jitsu to totally understand it, but you're a 6th degree black belt. I believe I'm correct on that.
Yep.
One of the first 12 in the United States to get your black belts. I believe you were the first person to actually submitted Brazilian. You were the first American to compete in the Mundials. So if we were going to create a list of Brazilian Jiu Jitsu experts, which is a word I know people in that world like to stay away from, but you'd be at the top of the list. So that's a super long intro to this question. Considering all of your time on the mat and the expertise that you've earned, how do you maintain a learning mentality to continue to try to get better, even if it's just at the margins?
Well, I'm going to say that part of that comes from the modeling, not only of my parents who were always reading and learning, Dan Inosanto, who was my Jeet Kune Do instructor. One of the things he would say is always be a student first. Hickson is that way, especially in his older age. And it truly is, if you want to get better at whatever it is, you have to become a student. Because once you think you know, you have shut out all new knowledge, right? And it's that the ignorant have no idea they're ignorant. That's what ignorance is, right? And one of the lines that I've been like repeating in my head for the last 7 years all the time, depending on what room I'm in, is to guard myself against arrogance when I'm in a room full of fools who I perceive as fools, lest I become one. Because and obviously we are witnessing that with the rise of political extremism and cancel culture, which both sides think they're the one who doesn't do it, when they're like, to me, it's pretty clear what's like. I think like the communication, the key is to listen.
Yes.
And try to feel, it's like, I almost hesitate to use this word because the meaning of the word has so changed, but the word liberal is a great word in its true meaning, just like the word conservative is a good concept in its true meaning. So is progressive. But each of these outlooks on life, like when you analyze leadership traits, like loyalty, decisiveness, honor, egalitarianism, fairness, like all these things, right? People who identify as conservative will tend to place loyalty at the top. People who identify as progressive will tend to place fairness at the top. Liberals tend to place truth at the top. And people always lump liberals in with progressives, and they often align, but not always. And in American history, with the height of European Enlightenment, which was a liberal movement, created a liberal democratic republic, which is what America is, with a conservative structure to protect the liberal institution. But that's too complex for fucking our stupid human brains to grasp. So we quickly lump in one of those words with the bad guy. And I think the key to a communication is really empathy, and you try to put yourself in another person's shoes and zoom in and zoom out. Which is kind of, it's like, I always like to, this is just me, I try to remind myself, what is the big picture? The big picture is in, what is it, in 13 billion years, this is all going to be gone. Just fucking gone. Whether you believe in heaven or not, from my perspective, the sun will have swallowed up the earth. Whatever we call ourselves humans now will have altered and evolved or adapted and became machine or like whatever it is. This is so little, right? And then I always remind myself that I can't remember the exact thing, but if the Milky Way galaxy were the size of a Cheerio, you could fill 40 swimming pools of those Cheerios with other galaxies just that we can see because of the speed of light. That we are so tiny and insignificant, not in a way that should make you feel bad, but when you realize, I think there's like a 1 in 4 trillion chance that sperm that met that egg made you. It's like just the fact that I have consciousness and this brief little flash of time on this planet makes me hungry and grateful. Does it make me afraid too? Of course it does. Does it bring up all existential fears? Of course it does. Does it make me, does it help me understand my fellow man's grace and predicament? Their selflessness and their selfishness. And so I try to there was 20 years ago, briefly, I was a cop. There's a whole substance abuse thing in there and alcoholism, but I would always try to empathize with whoever I put cuffs on. Because one of the old cops told me before he retired was, don't let this job make you think that there's a bunch of bad people out there. There are some. But mostly you deal with good people having the worst day of their life. And when you start thinking everybody is an asshole, everybody's bad and all that, you can see why jobs like cops tend to draw you to the conservative side. You can see why jobs like social worker, teacher draw you to the more progressive liberal side. And both are true. Both have elements of serious truth. There are people out there who are bad, and if given the chance, they'll fucking kill you. And you got to guard yourself against liberal naivete and conservative paranoia. And I see those two things often. I don't think people see it.
And it gets back to your previous point about exploring the ends and finding the middle. That not everybody is going to be bad. Not everybody's going to be naive. How do we find that middle spot? And I do appreciate the law enforcement analogy with empathy. Is the first time you and I have had a chance to connect. I've got a background in investigations. And actually, I live in North Carolina now, but I was visiting here for work years before I moved here. And I happened to be driving around with another investigator whose wife was pregnant at the time. They were having a daughter. And we were going out to dinner and passed some skaters on the street. And I don't talk a lot about kind of my background and stuff. People probably don't care, but I grew up a punk rock kid. So skaters were my friends. That's just who I hung around. And the guy I'm with looks out the window and says, I would never let my daughter date someone who looks like that. And I just look at him and start laughing. I'm like, homie, who do you think is sitting next to you right now? You just never know. But that empathy piece is so important. And there's no need to get into it, but there's a huge thing in the jiu-jitsu world with maybe people getting their black belts too fast and blah, blah, blah. But sometimes I think you should have empathy for the person in that position and think about their personal issues that put them in this place and not really debate about whether it's fair or not, which probably doesn't create the best segue, but thinking about promotions, I heard a very interesting quote from you in one of your videos that really struck with me because I teach for a living. It's what I do. You talked about the difference between teaching and coaching. And I went back and listened to that short little clip a few times. I would be grateful if you could walk us through how you see the similarities, but the important difference between teaching and coaching.
Right. And before I even say anything, I suggest you guys read Wittgenstein on language and the meaning of words and delve into what words really are strange things because they are symbolic representations in our heads, right? And for a lot of people, teaching, coaching can mean the exact same thing. And a lot of conversations get down to we have to define if we're both agreeing on the meaning of a word, right? Just like that liberal conservative. When I say conservative, I don't mean it in a derogatory way. And then when I say liberal, I don't. But people hear it in that way, right? And but teaching is almost a separate skill than a coaching. Like I know people who are really good teachers, and teaching tends to be really good for a student to acquire knowledge. And I may not answer this the way I answered it the last time. I don't remember because my opinion's fluid and change. Coaching is almost like finding your students' individual flaws and redirecting them or getting them to get rid of them. And that's a different skill. And sometimes the best coaches aren't that good at teaching, like a class. Like we're going to do a class on fundamental hip throws or the structure of an investigation and that's all important too. But then what happens when something that pattern recognizes one way, but there's an underlying thing that meshes, right? So it's kind of like that thing. And coaching, I think, truly does. God, help me out here. Like, what do you think?
Well, I appreciate you asking. And I love how you delineate between the two, because I think, and here I am, I'm way out over my skis with this one. But even if I'm teaching a jiu-jitsu class, I can stand there and I can teach, okay, these are the 3 moves that are going to chain together. This is how we do it. This is why. This is based on the reaction. These are the core concepts. I'm going to move myself. I'm not going to move my opponent. I'm going to protect the middle. I'm going to maintain base, posture, connection, whatever. But then when we actually do it, and they start doing the moves, to your point on the one-on-one coaching, now I have to say, well, wait a minute, your grip's in the wrong place, your elbow's too far outside, your feet are too close together, whatever it is, and tie it back to the points that were taught. Earlier, you talked about empathy, which I was so happy to hear. It's a core theme of many of the conversations that we have. Based on your level of expertise and the detail that you can spot things and put things together, when you see other well, I guess it could go either way. Sometimes high-level people have fragile egos and they can be difficult to coach. And sometimes beginners can be so scared that they can be hard to coach because they get embarrassed really easy. So yes. I guess on either end of the spectrum, how do you help people correct their flaws while being empathetic?
I'm terrible at verbatim quotes, but there's a leadership quote that I wrote on my wall 20 something years ago, that a sign of good leadership is when the subordinates complete the task and think they did it. Right? Where it's that you don't push from behind, you attract and pull from up front. Like that model too, like Ranger mottos, Rangers lead the way. There's the Marine Corps motto, Ductus exemplo, lead by example. Like I think all these things, which also relates to stoicism, you can find that in most substance abuse recovery programs. You can find that in good churches. And not all of them are good. I think there's a lot of them that are corrupt. I'm a big fan, even though I'm not religious. The 7 deadly sins, and I'm trying to think of the priest that came up. That was at St. Augustine. I can't remember, but I think that's the wisest thing that came out of the Catholic Church. Greed, pride, envy, sloth, gluttony, resentment or rage. Like I can't remember all of them offhand. I always have
Lust might be in there. I don't know them all either.
Yeah, but like I think when we personally start rationalizing that one of those is okay for us, like with greed, everybody else is greedy. I got to get mine too. Vanity, God, I got to look good. I got to make sure I curate my image, which obviously has gotten worse in this age of social media. It'd be hard to be a kid these days because of the vanity thing and the greed thing. And then sloth, everybody's lazy. But then it's very easy for us older guys, now that we're like, I'm an early Gen Xer. You're probably a late Gen Xer.
Nailed it.
We identify with a lot. The people literally born a year or two earlier, they're boomers, and I just don't identify at all with a lot of things. But like, it's very easy for us to go into nostalgia and believe that the past was better. We all do it. And because in some ways it was. And we can always cherry pick and find out the wonderful things. God, when I was a kid, we didn't have to wear helmets on our skateboards or bikes. We could ride to the mall as long as we were home at the dark. People weren't recording you on their phone. Like, there's a lot to be said, right? But at the same time, you could like find out things where life has gotten way better, like every generation. And so I think it's important to not only see where things might have been better in the past, but also where things were shittier in the past. That's like pretty important. And like, as a history buff, the further you go back, the more bleak history was. And ultimately, the shittier it was. And the more violent it was. And the more unjust it was. And with this brief period of time that which was all the boomers, and now us Gen Xers are, I think, possibly experiencing the end of it, maybe a new thing, who knows, but was known as the 80-year peace after World War II and the age of prosperity. And even though there were wars, there was Russia and Afghanistan, the rise of communism, like all these things, but ultimately we have not had a state versus a state war, largely because of nukes, mutual assured destruction. And I personally think, and the only reason why I'm saying this is I think people have forgotten how close we have come and how many times to fucking this planet entirely up. And we are very capable of doing it again. And for me, and I haven't watched it yet, and I'm going to watch it on Netflix, and I always feel like I got a crystal ball because I've been worrying about this shit since 2016, and now it's in the zeitgeist again. You know how whether it's Russia, America, or China, one dude has to make a choice, and they get between 12 and 25 minutes to make that fucking choice. And that is fucking terrifying. That is terrifying, regardless of who the one man is. And from my perspective, it's terrifying when I think of the 5 men right now who have a finger on the button. I don't fucking trust any of those 5 at fucking all. And Israel has a doctrine that if ever they feel like it is a terminal threat to Israel, they will launch into the US and Russia just to fucking blow it all up. And
well, I'm glad you and I had a chance to talk before that happens.
So, having said that again, zooming in and zooming out, all these little things, whether a person honked at me and cut me off in traffic and all these things are so fucking unimportant. And like I often, as a joking line, like in Jiu Jitsu, especially before YouTube and the internet moves were more secret and people wouldn't want to show non-team member, non-tribe members certain moves and groups and all that. And I'll show you anything now, because in an age of climate change, political extremism, thermonuclear war, the rise of AI, jiu-jitsu is so unimportant. That like so many things are unimportant. But then let's zoom back in. What is important? Your close friends and family, right? That's what's really important. And like, as my wife would say, if you want to change the world, I can't just exist in doom. And the best thing I can do is not be an activist out there holding a sign, because that just polarizes. The best thing I can do is communicate and connect with as many people as I can on a human level, give them as much respect as I can, even if I don't agree with them, and don't praise them if I do agree. Try to get them to question their own belief that I might agree with. And that's the best thing I could do to help prevent one of those existential catastrophes from leading us into the sixth mass extinction. Study some big history and you'll go, fuck, we've had 6 mass extinctions on the planet? Yes, we have. 6 mass extinctions that have ripped through and wiped out up to 70% of all species. Gone, right? And for the first time in human history since 1946, we can now basically destroy the world. We can. And then with AI, now we don't tell AI what it does. AI might tell us what it's going to do.
Yeah, that might be the most slippery of all slopes as that continues to progress. You talked about earlier the push versus pull leadership, like either pushing people in front of us or pulling people along with us. I thought that was a fantastic illustration, pulling people along with us from a leadership standpoint.
And sometimes you got to push.
True.
There are times where you got to get out from the front and run around and push somebody up.
And that gets back to that contextual awareness, understanding what individuals or situations call for at that moment in time, which I think ties into something else that I've heard you talk about a little bit, which is the concept that environment is stronger than will.
Yes.
That for a lot of us, how we interpret a situation, what we say, the actions that we take might be different depending on the environment that we're in at the time.
Right. It's like that thing. Most of us, including me, run around thinking that I'm right 80% of the time, some days 90, and every once in a while I'm wrong and I admit it and blah, blah, when really often it's the other way around. My perceptions are totally wrong and I'm missing, like, I think it's really important to reground myself. And again, I'm going to go to the scientific method here. Instead of forming an opinion and finding evidence which supports it, form an opinion on a hypothesis and try to disprove it.
Yes.
Try to prove it wrong. And one of the things that just happens in combat sports, in all sports, is there's the laboratory, which is continually testing the same thing over and over again. Like, you don't go, oh, I learned an arm bar. Now I know it works. Well, let's see. Let's see if it works in this situation against this guy, right? Because it's that openness that the only constant is change. And even that's not constant. And that, like, I think, yeah, I really believe that the key to, God, I don't want to say it because it sounds so absolutist, but the key to almost everything is to begin with humility, open-mindedness, and then you find that willingness drive, right? And don't be in the moment, but don't be stuck in the moment, right?
It's a great point.
It's that thing where, like, a lot of, like, people, like, when they're thinking about Eastern religion and be here now and all these things, like that is like an important part of knowing who you are, finding humility, finding peace and all that. But at the same time, part of you has to reflect on the past and project on what you want your future outcomes to be, which then does bring you back in the now, because now is where it all changes. But you can't just be in the now. And you'll go mad if you're always in the past or the future, right?
For sure.
So it's kind of one of those things where the self-help stuff loves to take one of these nuggets and try to make it, again, a thing that's all about self. And as soon as you're all about self, you're losing it.
Yeah, and kind of you brought up stoicism a few times and how that's become big. And to your point, there's value there for sure. And I love how you differentiated its selflessness for others as opposed to for yourself.
Yep.
And the self-help. Even some of the talk about generations, us being on kind of opposite ends of Generation X. A lot of times I try to help people at least wrap their brain around the fact that these terms, these trends, these things, there's value there. But remember that somebody codified some of these things or named some of these things or packaged some of these things so they can put food on their table. And that has an impact on it as well, as opposed to just blindly subscribing to any one thing or one way of thought. You talked about being in the moment, but not getting stuck in the moment. Is there a way that you approach that to try to help yourself in that situation?
For me, maybe it's an ADHD thing. If I start moving my body, what's that? Jump? Okay. That's my son. He's not in school today because his stomach hurt. So,
been there.
And that's that, like, part of me wants to go, go to school anyways, let them send you home because I want to teach him you show up no matter what, right? But then that has its, like, drawbacks as well, right? That's like lacking empathy, right?
It's a fine balance.
It's a fine balance. And I think one of the hardest things in the world, at least for me and my wife agrees, is parenting. And is there a bunch of parenting books out there that have valuable things in there? Or not? There's a couple of Instagram parenting things I keep popping up in my algorithm that I really like a lot of. And then every once in a while, I'll see one that's like, oh, this is more of that self-help influencer bullshit, right?
Yep.
And because anybody, here I go again with my Hegelian Taoism. In one sense, the answer should be simple. but you should never think it's easy. And there's nuance and complexity. And I think when we think, oh, it's all too complex and nuance will overwhelm ourselves, and we think, oh, it's simple, easy answer, I got this, you're going to wind up a fool. And again, it's that balance. And it's like, it's both of those things at once, right? It's both the easiest thing and simple, and at the same time, it's completely complex and impossible.
I do agree with many things. I think it's true in communication for sure. You talked about word choice, understanding what word meanings are to other people, even contextually, words I might choose right now talking to you. I could be having a similar conversation with somebody else sitting at a bar, at a formal meeting, at a conference table, and it would be a little bit different. Even bringing it back to jiu-jitsu, one of the things that we'll often laugh about after the fact is something as simple as foot placement, hand placement, elbow placement, the angle of your head, like something that might seem entirely insignificant, which on the surface is simple. Just touch your ear to your shoulder. And now the UPA works a lot better. But it's actually complex as to what that means physically in the situation for carrying somebody else's weight and where you are. So I think that's a great point, that never assume simple is always easy.
Yes, I 100% agree. And, like I always think, God, I wish I would have, had this wisdom when I was younger, which is what everyone says, right? And that's where, again, we have to guard ourselves against the arrogance of thinking now we're wise. Because the youth has the creativity, the vision. That's who changes things. It was the young Einstein that discovered general and special relativity, right? It's often that young energy of that willingness, sometimes with naivety, to try something new that us old people think we know the answer already, right? Or we've discovered wisdom.
I had a conversation, actually, there's the episode that went live today, the day that we're recording this, Emmanuel Manilakakis. He runs Toronto Fight Club, and he's a Systema guy. He does a lot of different things. But one of the big things that he talked about was collect knowledge, but distill wisdom, and the difference between knowledge and wisdom. And that one line I saw from him inspired the whole conversation. And I think you're echoing it here as well. I like to joke that every time we think we have it all figured out, an angel loses its wings. Like, it's never, ever all figured out.
That's a good one. Yep.
I know we only have a couple minutes left. I've got one question I'd just love to ask you before we wrap this up, especially on the communication side. When you first started training, you were training under the Gracies and the Machados, who were the first to arrive here in the States. Is it safe for me to assume that they struggled to speak English at that point in time?
Yes.
So as a student learning a very technical art from somebody who couldn't speak the language that you speak, how did you develop the focus to overcome those obstacles and begin to learn? A lot of times people say, this doesn't make sense, the teacher sucks, I don't get it, and they'll excuse their way out. You learned something very technical from people who couldn't speak your language. How did you develop the focus to do that?
Well, I'm going to say, definitely, like some people often say, oh man, you must have been so self-disciplined to learn the jiu-jitsu. And I always think, actually, it was more passion, right? I wanted this. And some of them spoke better English than others. And the one thing that I realized back then, and I'm 24, I'm studying philosophy and art and all that. I realized that grappling is a language itself.
Very true.
Right? I think of it as a language. And like a language, I can't memorize words or a phrase and then speak of a language. It's a communication. And there's people who who speak the same language, but they use slang there, which is what, like, there's some slang with jujitsu that sometimes becomes canon and incorporated. And there's accents to a jujitsu. So I think, like, there are terms and words that like, with the help of Americans saying, no, in English, you would call it this, that are almost shouldn't have been like the term used. But when you're a white and a blue belt, you don't have that thing. But ultimately, and again, it goes back to that thing about words, how powerful words are, because words are these symbols that fixate in us. Words are constructs, right? As much as money is a construct. And it's a construct that when we collectively all believe it, then we have a ground in which we can communicate or spend money or whatever it is, right? But I think it's important to recognize that it is a construct. And are there some things that some people maybe on the left call constructs that, like, might not be as much of a construct, or a bit both? Yeah. Is there a tend to think that things are concrete facts, often from the right, that truly are just constructs? Yeah. But I think it's important to definitely recognize that language is a construct. And that's where wisdom, I think, can enter a little bit into our heads, which definitely want to reduce things to black and white, right or wrong, yes and no, because that's the way our brains' biology is wired. And in the age of computers, is it the chicken or the egg? Are we creating computers like us, or are we discovering through machine learning neural networks that this is how our brains work? Who knows, right? But we as humans will anthropomorphize everything. It's why our cars have two headlights and a grill, because that's two eyes and a mouth. Because it would be weird if not, right? We can't help but to anthropomorphize everything. Every kid show with animals, the animals are anthropomorphized. And are we anthropomorphizing our chat GPTs? We certainly are. But is it mimicking how, like, as an artist, I'm going to close with this. So I'm one of those art kids who loved art, and at 24 years old, decided to put art on hold because there's no money in it. And I could go on a long rant that would be politically incorrect of me about the fucking hootie faluti art world, which I won't do because I'm more of a lowbrow artist anyways. But I made a conscious effort to put art on hold for a couple of years. Almost 20 years went by, and I'm like, something is missing in my life. Oh, art. Like, I replaced art with martial arts and craft. And craft is an art. Restoring a car, I mean, that's cool. And you could get so good at it, it could be called an art. Martial arts, in essence, is kind of an art, but actually doing fine art, right? So I enroll, and I don't know anything about computers. I barely had an email address. This is years back. I enroll in a computer art class to learn how to use Photoshop, Illustrator, and all that. Of course, I'm the old guy in the room. All these young people all ready know all this stuff. Finally, I commit to learn how to use these computer art programs. And I get really good at it. And I arrogantly realize that, unlike these young kids who are like back when I quit art, they don't have a story yet. a narrative, a life. So their art lacks depth, even though they technically know how to do it, right? But anyhow, I'm going to fast forward a couple of years. I always wanted to animate. I've had these dreams in my head of these animated shows I want to do, and graphic novels, and I didn't realize what a team it takes to do all this stuff. So I enroll in this animation class, a really cool instructor who'd worked for Disney, Pixar, and all those things. I'm the oldest guy in the class. There's a whole other story about the school. Here I am back at a college campus, and there was a safe space in there. The person next to me was a trans, and like that person and I became pretty good friends, and it was a cool experience. But I kept wondering when the instructor was gonna like teach us how to animate, which is kind of like coding. And I go up after class, and he says, and this is 10 years ago, he says, I hate to break your heart, but AI is going to replace all of this. And I feel bad almost teaching this class to all these young kids. Like, it's like teaching VCR repair. Like, this is going to go obsolete the way the dude who shoed horses, the Model T, replaced. And it broke my heart because I was actually having fun. I would spend hours doing one animation of a hand, right? And he explained, you're going to be able to point your phone at it. It'll record it all. And teams of animators and artists will be eliminated. Mm. And that is also what happened when a computer came. My mom, who was an editor with a top secret clearance, was in the era of where there were people who would have to do calculations and file paperwork and type, and all those jobs, all those skilled jobs vanished. So everything has changed, right?
And change isn't always the same.
And change isn't, yes. So I end it with, you got to lean into the change, at the same time be a little nostalgic for what we're losing. Right?
I would agree with that. And I also think that speaks to the depth that you just mentioned. When we have the experience, we have the story, we have the depth that allows us to appreciate where we've come from, but then also adapt and change as the times do, which I think really is a thread that goes through a lot of what we talked about today, maintaining a student's mentality, even as an expert instructor. There's a lot that you shared today that follow along that line. I really appreciate you giving us an hour of your time to share your philosophy and your experience. I've been taking notes the whole time you've been talking, and there's some great lessons for all of us in here. I really appreciate you sharing it. Real quick, just as we wrap up, I want to ask for people who are interested in exploring your art, if people are interested in hearing more from you, your podcast, if they do train jiu-jitsu and they're interested in connecting with you and watching some of your videos and maybe attending one of your jiu-jitsu seminars, where should they go to connect with you?
Combatbase.com. Combatbase, one word.com. I think my Instagram is Chris Haueter 96, and then I have a Chris Haueter art. There's a Combat Base Club Instagram too. I'm of the philosophy that like I pick up people who don't like to be in rigid, controlled hierarchies. I often say, if you are paying some other man to tell you what you can wear, what patch you can have on, and ordering you around, you might be in a cult. And Combat the Base, we're the opposite of that. You get to be you, as long as you're not one of Jeffrey Epstein's clients or something else like that. You're pretty much welcome to Combat Base. And I prefer the coaching model, but obviously instruction is important, and we've got a lot of that too.
You do. You get a ton of great instructionals available out there for people. And if the universe works out the right way, hopefully I'll have a chance to experience some of that coaching in the near future myself. But I really do appreciate you taking the time to be here. It's been a pleasure to meet you. Thank you so very much.
Absolutely, sir.
Take care. Thank you. Chris, thank you again for taking the time to join us today. I really appreciate all that you shared. Been a very unique perspective, driven by a really unique set of life experiences. And I really appreciate you taking the time to share with us today. Thank you so much. I love how you talked about, among many other things, the difference between teaching and coaching, giving information, identifying and correcting or solving problems. Really appreciated that thought process. And on the topic of leadership, the difference between that push and pull style of leadership and contextually which one may be important. Of all the things that you said, we talked about empathy a lot. The conversation around beginning with humility, I thought was fantastic. And again, I really like how you talked about be in the moment, but let's not get stuck in the moment. So much great wisdom in such a short conversation, Chris. I really do appreciate it. Thank you. And I hope you all got as much out of that conversation as I did. Thank you so much for being here for another week. Please, before you head out, take a quick moment, like the show, share the show, subscribe to it. Certainly share your feedback with us. We really appreciate all the support. And take a quick second to check out our sponsors. You can head over to humantel.com to get all your questions answered and begin to develop the skill set necessary to understand when people's emotions are likely shifting, again, by recognizing those changes in their facial expressions and nonverbal communication. While you're there, enter the code INCLUSIVE25 for 25% off the training of your choice. For the professional interviewers, head over to certifiedinterviewer.com. That's where you can get all your questions answered, learn everything you need to know about joining the International Association of Interviewers and earning the Certified Forensic Interviewer designation. And while you're online, we appreciate you checking out Inquasive.com to learn more about the programs our clients ask us to custom facilitate for their senior leaders, sales teams, HR teams, and beyond to teach them how to unlock hidden value in all of their high-impact conversations. Once again, we thank you for being here week after week. Thank you so very much. Stay safe. Take care of each other. We'll see you next time.